Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to Birmingham Bible Church's Winning Wednesday. We are so glad that you have decided to join us here on today. And it is today and every day that we are declaring that you are a winner in Christ Jesus. And not only are you a winner in Christ Jesus, but you are a winner in every area of your life. As a matter of fact, just stop right now and say to yourself, I am a winner. Say to yourself, I am victorious. Say to yourself, I am more than a conqueror. Say to yourself one more time, I am a winner. Well, once again, we are so glad to be providing you some information here on Winning Wednesday. And so today, we could not close out the month of February without talking about our heritage, African-American heritage. And so we have someone who is very educated, who is very well qualified and overqualified to talk about this topic. We have Dr. Robert Weems. He is going to educate us and enlighten us. I believe there is a saying that if we don't know where we came from, then we don't know where we are going. So let that marinate and let that get down in your spirit on today. And so I want to go ahead and just share with you just a little bit about Dr. Robert Weems Jr. He has been the Willard W. Garvey Distinguished Professor of Business History at Wichita State University since the fall of 2011. Before coming to WSU, he taught at the University of Missouri-Columbia and the University of Iowa. He is a native of Chicago and received his PhD in history from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. During his career, Robert Weems also published spoken widely in the areas of African American business and economic history, along with nearly 40 journal articles, book chapters, and encyclopedia entries. His publications include 5 books in the realm of African American business history and a co-edited reference book related to African American history and culture. Professor Weems also served as a historical advisor and appeared in the documentary Boss, A Black Experience in Business, which premiered on PBS in April of 2019. During his tenure at Wichita, Professor Weems coordinated the Wichita African American Business History Project, where he gathered information related to the history of local African American entrepreneurship. In September of 2017, Professor Weems donated his audio interviews, transcripts, and documentary materials he generated from his project to Wichita State University Library Special Collections. This material is envisioned to be an important resource for students, scholars, and others interested in this aspect of Wichita history. Dr. Weems has also participated in a wide variety of community-based activities in Wichita, including serving on the Kansas African American Museum Board of Directors, membership in the African American Council of Elders of Wichita and South Kansas, and serving on the Advisory Council coordinating the opening of the historic Dunbar Theater. He also served on the board of directors of the Heartland Wichita Black Chamber of Commerce. In this capacity, Dr. Weems established and coordinates the organization's Wichita's Black Business Hall of Fame initiative. Based upon his professional track record, Dr. Weems has received a variety of awards, honors. Recent ones include the 2017 H.N. Sims Excellence in Education Award given by the Wichita branch of NAACP and a 2019 Alfred Nelson Marquis Lifetime Achievement Award given by the Marquis Who's Who in America. Well, as you can see, he is very well able to talk about this topic. And so I would like to introduce to some and present to everyone, Dr. Robert Weems. Hello, Dr. Weems.
How you doing, Lady Pam?
I'm great.
Yeah, well, thank you for that introduction. And I want to thank everybody who's here to hear me talk today. Because again, as you can tell from the introduction, a lot of my information or a lot of my research is based on African American business history. And today I'm going to talk about a topic related to African American business history related to Black insurance companies. And I'll just go ahead and share my screen. Okay, again, the title of my presentation today is Whatever Happened to Black-Owned Insurance Companies? The Decline and Disappearance of an African American Community Institution. Now, African American insurance companies historically have represented a cornerstone of Black economic development, evolving from a tradition of mutual aid dating back to Philadelphia's Free African Society, founded in 1787. Black-owned insurance companies over the years have attempted to perpetuate and promote economic and social cooperation among African Americans. However, as a disturbing prelude to the decline and disappearance of Black insurers in recent decades, Black consumer support of these enterprises, even during the height of American apartheid, left something to be desired. Now, oops, let me go back. Pardon me. Okay, now, during the first decades of the 20th century, white insurance companies openly discriminated against African Americans. Some of the companies, larger companies like Prudential, they refused to insure Black people altogether. Now, other companies like Metropolitan Life, they did offer insurance coverage to African Americans, but they charged African Americans higher premiums than they charged their white clients. And also companies like Metropolitan Life and other white insurers that did offer policies to African Americans did not employ Black agents. And it was this very openly discriminatory environment that contributed to the birth and development of Black insurance companies. Now, even though African Americans in the early 20th century were grossly discriminated against by white insurance companies, Black consumers initially gave majority of their businesses to these white insurers. Now, when we talk about the history of African American insurance companies, a truly classic book is Mara S. Stewart's An Economic Detour, A History of Insurance in the Lives of American Negroes. And in An Economic Detour, Stewart really lamented the fact that African Americans spent most of their insurance money with white insurers rather than with Black insurers. And in fact, some of the stats that he included in his book, An Economic Detour, at the end of 1938, the weekly premium income of Black insurance companies was $248,910. On the flip side of that, Blacks paid white insurance companies $995,640 a week for insurance coverage. And in response to this disparity between what Blacks were spending with Black-owned insurance companies and what they were spending with white insurance companies, Stewart wrote the following in An Economic Detour. Every one of the $248,910 paid in the Negro companies is free to perform its natural function of helping to create employment to which the qualified among the group that spends it are eligible. Every one of the $995,640 paid by Negroes in the white companies, as soon as paid over the line, becomes earmarked for discrimination against the group that spends it. Now, even though Mayor S. Stewart in the early 1940s provided a sort of pessimistic viewpoint of the status of African American insurance companies, later in the 1940s, we saw the fortunes of Black insurance companies significantly improve. In 1962, there was a study of African American insurance companies that covered the period from 1930 to 1960. And in this particular study, the author identified the 1940s as being an especially profitable decade for Black insurance companies. And I'm just going to read a couple quotes from this study that are highlighted in bold. Insurance in force grew in the Negro companies at an annual rate 3 times that of the industry, 13.9 versus 4.4%. Similarly, total income received by the Negro companies during the 1940 to 1950 decade increased at an average rate of 3 times that of the industry, 13.4 versus 4.4%. Moreover, quote, the average annual rate of growth in total admitted assets was more than twice as high in the Negro companies than in the industry during the 1940 and 1950 decade, 15.9 versus 6.7%. And finally, quote, during the 1940 to 1950 decade, policy reserves grew in Negro companies at an average rate more than twice that of the industry, 14.5 versus 6.1%. And in fact, when we look at the 1940s, Black insurance companies actually outperformed their white counterparts in several key areas. And this was directly linked to African American occupational and wage gains during World War II and afterwards. Now, white insurance companies, for their part, perhaps surprised by their Black counterparts' strong performance during the 1940s, began to reevaluate the African American consumer market during the 1950s. And in fact, this situation to me is just so extremely ironic in that the historic discrimination that companies like Prudential and Metropolitan Life and other white insurance companies had demonstrated toward Blacks actually helped them to generate new business in the African American community beginning in the 1950s. Now, because Blacks had previously been denied equitable insurance coverage with companies like Prudential and Metropolitan Life, it quickly became a sort of status symbol among Blacks in the 1950s to say that they were being offered the same type of policy that these large companies distributed to their white counterparts. Now, also, when we look at the 1950s, beside profiting from previous discrimination, companies such as Prudential and Metropolitan Life subsequently increased their market share in the African American community by recruiting top agents from Black insurance companies. And in fact, in my own thinking about this, I can see a direct parallel between what happened in the insurance industry and what happened to baseball in the 1940s and 50s, where in fact, just as the major leagues was able to get the best talent from the old Negro baseball leagues, we saw insurance companies like Metropolitan Life and Prudential with promises of financial reward, being able to quickly secure a cadre of trained Black insurance agents. Now, when we look at what happened in the 1950s and in terms of the profitability of Black companies versus white companies, I want to return to David Abner's research in looking at the insurance industry from 1930 to 1960. And when we look at the numbers for the 1950s, we clearly see the script being flipped from what they had been in the 1940s. And in fact, Abner made the point that between 1943 and 1957, the number of white companies that insured African Americans nearly doubled from 55 to 104. And this significant quest for Black consumers definitely helped the profitability of white companies during the 1950s. And indeed, when we compare the 40s to the 50s, whereas the 1940s, Black companies outperformed white companies, we look at such things as companies' insurance in force. During the decade of 1950 to 1960s, that figure for large white companies was almost twice that of Black companies, 9.6 versus 5.3%. Likewise, during the 1950s, when we look at white companies' figures for total income, quote, they average an annual rate of more than 1.5 times as great as that of Black companies, 7.3 versus 4.9%. So in fact, by the 1960s, the economic landscape that Mara S. Stewart had complained about a generation earlier had in fact gotten progressively worse for Black insurance companies. Now, for their part, as white companies made even more inroads in the African American community, we saw Black companies attempting to, fight back against this situation. And I want to talk a bit about what I call here the case study of the Chicago Metropolitan Insurance Company. And this particular company was the company I did my PhD dissertation on, and I later revised my dissertation into my first book. Now, again, Chicago Metropolitan provides an example of how Black insurance companies sought to respond to increased white competition. Now, at its January 20th, 1964 annual meeting, the president of Chicago Met squarely addressed the issue of employee defections. And this is a quote from his presidential address at the annual meeting. From this moment on, let no one among us look upon this company as some sort of stepping stone, a kind of training ground for some other job somewhere else. I understand that this is the attitude of certain white companies who are willing to let us go to the expense of training and preparing personnel, and they take them when we have completed this training. Look not at your company as a minor league outfit where ambitious people prepare for the major leagues. Remember, we are Negroes, and any insurance company that employs more than 500 people should not be considered minor league in our eyesight. Now, besides appeals to racial pride and unity, Chicago Metropolitan and other Black insurers sought to counteract growing competition from industry giants by actively seeking to recruit white agents to help make inroads in the mainstream consumer market. And in fact, at Chicago Met's Board of Directors meeting of November 22nd, 1961, the board passed a resolution where it said that in the future, quote, it would be a future policy of the company to employ competent persons in agency and office administration without regard to race, creed, or color. And in fact, Chicago Metropolitan subsequently interviewed several whites for positions in the company's agency department. However, this attempt at racial integration unfortunately proved fruitless. Now, while some of Chicago Met's Black agents eagerly defected to white-owned companies, white insurance agents were not similarly attracted to employment with this Black firm. Now, other Black insurers besides Chicago Met were similarly concerned about expanding their client base. In fact, the 1963 convention of the National Insurance Association, and the NIA was the trade association of Black-owned insurance companies. This annual meeting, in fact, focused on the issue of attracting white personnel. And at this meeting, the NIA's newly elected president, North Carolina Mutual's William A. Clement, pretty much made the point that unless Black companies were successful in recruiting, selecting, training, and supervising other ethnic groups, quote, we will be limited in penetrating the total market. Now, unfortunately, despite Clement's words and pleas, Black companies were subsequently unable to attract white employees and clients. Thus, by 1967, NIA companies such as Chicago Met were forced to conclude that their future operations would be dictated by ongoing de facto, if not de jure, racial exclusion. Now, for the next couple slides, I want to talk about sort of the impact of increased white incursion into the African-American consumer market. And I want to look at African-American insurance companies during the 30-year period from 1962 to 1992. And indeed, when we look at this particular period, the last decades of the 20th century were extremely difficult for Black-owned insurance companies. Now, these companies found themselves in the very unenviable position of being unable to expand their client base, while simultaneously seeing white competitors secure more and more Black policyholders. And as a result of this, we saw an increasing number of Black insurance companies disappearing from the landscape of American business. And indeed, when we look at the 30-year period from 1962 to 1992, the number of African-American insurance companies dropped from 50 to 23, which was a 54% decrease. And moreover, those remaining companies saw a significant decline in their assets and premium income relative to the mainstream insurance industry. And again, just to give you some numbers, in 1962, the top 15 Black insurance companies had total assets of $303 million. In 1962, the industry at large had assets of $133 billion. And in 1962, the Black percentage of industry assets was 0.23%. We fast forward 30 years, the top 15 Black insurers had total assets of $711 million, whereas the industry at large had total assets of 1.6 trillion. So consequently, we saw the Black percentage of total assets of the industry decline to 0.05%. Even more telling when we talk about the decline of African-American insurance companies was in the realm of premium income. When we look at insurance companies, premium income is literally the lifeblood of a company, whether it's a Black company or what have you. And indeed, when we look at the premium income of Black companies in 1962, the top 15
There you are. Let me see. I can't hear you. Hold on a second. Let me.
I unmuted myself.
There we go. Okay, okay,
Yeah, I'm going back to the shared screen.
okay. That's fine.
Okay. Technical difficulties are
Yeah,
part of virtual programming.
it happens. Okay, you're still a co-host. Okay, it happens.
Oh, no problem. Okay, we're back in business.
All
Now,
right.
as I was saying, and looking at sort of the problems that African American insurance companies faced in the last decades of the 20th century, one of the real telling areas was in the area of premium income. The literal lifeblood of insurance companies is premium income. And when we look at Black companies in this period from 1962 to 1992, in 1962, the premium income of the top 15 Black insurers was $71 million. 30 years later, that had increased to 159 million. So in this 30-year period, we saw the premium income of African American insurance companies increase by 124%. However, when we look at the industry at large, we see some much, much, much larger numbers. In 1962, the industry at large had premium income of $19 billion. By 1992, that number had increased to 282 billion. And whereas the percentage increase in African American companies' premium income between 1962 to 1992 was 124%, the similar numbers for the industry at large was 1,385%. So we saw Black companies very much lagging behind the industry as a whole. Now, one of the unfortunate consequences of the decline in the number of African American insurance companies and the relative decline of their premium income was that we saw the disappearance of jobs in the Black insurance industry. And again, considering declines in other areas, it shouldn't be surprising that Black insurance companies experience significant staff reductions. And again, just to give you some numbers, at the end of 1977, America's then 39 Black-owned insurance companies employed 7,834 individuals. At the end of 1988, America's then 31 Black-owned insurance companies employed 5,088 individuals. So in fact, during the 1980s, we saw the number of Black-owned insurance companies declining by 7.9% from 39 to 31. However, the number of persons employed by Black-owned insurance companies declined by 35% during the 1980s, from 7,834 to 5,088. Now, the 1990s featured an even steeper decline in both the number of African American insurance companies and the number of individuals they employed. Now, on October 31st, 1988, America's 31 African American insurers employed 5,088 individuals. 10 years later, on December 31st, 1998, America's 10 Black-owned insurance companies employed 1,801 persons. So consequently, during the 1990s, the number of Black-owned insurance companies declined by 68%, from 31 to 10. And similarly, during the 1990s, the number of persons employed by Black-owned insurance companies declined by 65%, from 5,088 to 1,801. Now, while many Americans celebrated the coming of a new millennium, the early 21st century witnessed a continuance of the Black insurance industry's accelerated decline. Now, at the end of 1998, America's 10 remaining Black-owned insurance companies employed 1,801 individuals. 4 years later, at the end of 2002, America's 10 Black-owned insurers employed 925 persons. Thus, in a 4-year period from 1998 to 2002, the number of persons employed by Black insurers declined by 49%, from 1,801 to 925. And in fact, and these numbers are pretty stunning, when we look at the decline of persons employed by Black insurance companies from the 25-year period from 1977 to 2002, we see an 88% decline from 7,834 to 925. And again, and one of the very important points that I just want to stress here that I have in bold, many of these lost jobs were professional, not minimum wage positions. Because indeed, when we look at Black insurance companies, we see African Americans, pretty much having every job from president to janitor and everything in between. And literally to see this dramatic decline in the number of Black insurance companies, decline in assets, the decline in jobs. Also, unfortunately, this also equates into a significant loss of Black wealth. Now, when we look at what I would say one of the primary reasons as to this significant decline and disappearance of Black insurance companies was a simultaneous decline and disappearance of Black consumer support for Black insurance companies. And indeed, we could draw a direct link between the disappearance of jobs in the Black insurance company and the disappearance of Black consumer support for these companies. And again, just some other numbers to share with the audience. Between 1996 and 2002, African Americans spent $52.2 billion on insurance. But during that same period, the combined premium income of the top 10 Black insurance companies was $1.1 billion. Now, to put this another way, during the same period, slightly less than 2 cents of every dollar that African Americans spent on insurance was with Black-owned firms. Now, moving into the 21st century, the years 2003 and 2004 were especially brutal for the African American insurance industry. Now, during those years, the number of profitable Black insurers dropped from 10 to 5, and the remaining 5 Black firms had a collective premium income of $326.6 million. Now, at the same time, according to Target Market News, which is an authoritative publication looking at the insurance industry and African American consumer market, African American consumers spent $32.2 billion on insurance. And when we look at the premium income of African American insurance companies in 2003, 2004, and what African American consumers spent on insurance, Black people spent about a penny of every dollar spent on insurance with Black companies. And at this moment, the 2 remaining viable Black insurance companies, North Carolina Mutual and Atlanta Life, attract a literal microscopic portion of Black consumer spending. Now, when we look at African American insurance companies and some of the reasons for their decline, above and beyond the question of consumer support, is also the question of economy of scale. Now, economy of scale is, for those of you who are business people or know something about business, economy of scale is a principle that is important in terms of, how businesses conduct their operations. And specifically, as it worked and I have here Walmart as an example, just as Walmart can offer more economical prices than smaller retail, large mainstream insurance companies were able to offer cost-conscious Black consumers more economical coverage than smaller Black-owned companies. So indeed, one of the reasons why African Americans, bought more policies was a Prudential or Metropolitan Life, was that these were mega companies that, based upon economy of scale, were able to offer African American consumers better prices than their smaller Black counterparts. Now, on the surface, it may appear, looking at economy of scale, that late 20th and early 21st century Black consumers were, and in fact are, better served by white insurance companies with their lower prices than by historic Black insurance companies. However, when we take a closer look at the historic relationship between Black insurance companies and Black consumers, economy of scale and sort of, traditional notions of economy of scale, we have to take another look at it. When we look at the history of African American insurance companies, it is very clear that these companies had a long time commitment to reinvesting a significant proportion of their income back into the Black community, primarily in the form of mortgage loans. And just a little sidebar when we talk about insurance companies. Insurance companies are unique compared to other companies in that at any given moment in time, there are more people who are alive paying premiums than people who are dying and the company has to pay death benefits. So insurance companies regularly, run surpluses. And historically, one of the things that African American insurance companies did was to reinvest a significant proportion of their surplus income back into the Black community in such areas as mortgage loans. Now, as Black insurance companies have declined and disappeared, there's been a simultaneous decline and disappearance of the money that these firms have designated for community reinvestment. And I would argue that in the latter decades of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century, that we've seen a parallel deterioration of African American insurance companies and a deterioration of urban Black America's infrastructure. To me, that's not just coincidental, that there's a real linkage there because, again, Black insurance companies historically reinvested a lot of money back in Black communities. And if Black insurance companies have disappeared, that is equated into less money being reinvested in Black communities. And to reinforce this point, the final bullet here, while white-owned insurance companies, readily take Black African Americans' premium payments, they appear far less enthusiastic about investing in African American enclaves. Now, in conclusion, and again, before I get into the conclusion, this presentation doesn't present a lot of, if you will, feel good information, but this is, I think, important information that we need, especially as a community, to know, because one of the cornerstones of our historic economic development has almost come and gone without a trace. And this has had a significant impact, economic impact on our community. And when we look at sort of the decline and disappearance of African American insurance companies, it provides a sobering case study of what I would call the one-way nature of economic desegregation in recent decades. Now, specifically during the late 20th and early 21st century, we saw white-owned companies increase their market share among African American consumers. And conversely, we saw most Black-owned companies being unable to expand their client or customer base outside of the African American community. And clearly, an obvious counterbalance to this situation would be more African American consumer support of contemporary Black enterprises, not just Black insurance companies, but other Black businesses in general. And at this point, I'm open to any questions that you might have regarding what I've shared with you today.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Weems. And so what you're saying is so true, because I was reading something, and I don't know if this is still the statistic or not, but it was saying that there's 12.4% African Americans in this country, but we own less than 1% of the wealth in it. And it's because of what you said, we're not generating monies back into our communities. I, for one, did not even know that African American insurance companies existed. So, and I know there's a decline, but is Atlanta Life and North Carolina Mutual still here, still around?
Yeah, they're still around, but they are on life support. And again, Lady Pam, that's really telling in that, and that's one reason I'm excited to do the research that I do in terms of African American business history, because there's whole parts of our history that a lot of people have no cognizance of. And again, considering the type of business oriented capitalist society that we live in, uh, knowing about business and economics as it relates to our community, I think is indeed extremely important.
It is. And then just the fact, I don't want to get too far out there, but some of us believe that other racial groups' ice water is colder, and so we, instead of supporting our own, we'll go cross town and support other people. Um, but I tell you what, I truly am thankful for this information. Thank you so much. We're going to share it so other people would know about it. I'm actually going to look those companies up and see, but I know you did mention that a lot of times their premiums are more expensive, I guess, and so they can't compete with, I guess, the white companies. Is that kind of true?
Yeah, that's one of the issues
Okay.
that, and again, that's just economy of scale. That's a basic business principle. But the point that I'm making, again, in my thinking about African American insurance companies, is that these companies historically reinvested significant sums of money back into the Black community, and companies like Prudential and MetLife, while they take our money, but they're really not reinvesting in our communities. But again, this is just part of the problems Black companies face is a question of economics, going back to economy of scale, because just as we've seen smaller retails go by the wayside with the appearance of Walmart, that dynamic has occurred in a variety of other industries.
Yes, sir. Well, this is very sad to see this and to know this. I remember last year, of course, when George Floyd was killed on live TV, and of course, you had everybody was coming out apologizing for stuff and changing names and stuff because I didn't know, my former, so and so was slave owners and I was reading something and I didn't know this either, but the way insurance companies were originally set up, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that the white slave owners were insuring their black slaves. And
Oh
so
yeah,
I
yeah,
yeah, and isn't MetLife wasn't MetLife one of them?
yeah,
I know it
and
was, but
yeah. In fact, slavery, and again, from a business standpoint, that was the literal cornerstone of the American economy in the first decades of this country's existence and the preceding
mm,
colonial period.
mm. Well, if there's any black insurance agents that are watching this, we need y'all to pull y'all resources together and start some other black insurance companies. But thank you so much for this information, Dr. Weems. We really appreciate it. And I know you told me you're not on social media, but you are at the Wichita State University. So
Yeah.
people can kind of contact you that way, right? If they have any other questions.
Oh, sure, sure. Yeah, and in fact, if people have a pencil, but you can Google. My email address is Robert Robert Weems Weems
Mhm.
at wichita.edu. But yeah, you could just go to Google myself or Wichita State University, and you'd be able to access me uh, that way. And I am on LinkedIn. I'm not
Oh, okay.
totally off of social media, but I'm not on Facebook.
Okay, gotcha. No problem. No problem. Well, thank you so much for sharing this valuable information. I'm just going to share a couple of announcements that our church is doing. And so if you can hold tight for a second, and then we can go ahead and do this. So, just to let all of you who are watching know that we are in the midst of course, this is the year 2021, and we are reconstructing everything in our lives. So, we just believe in that everything is going to be reconstructing your life as well. So, keep that in the forefront of your mind that this is Reconstruction 2021. And then we are in the middle of our 40 days of power through fasting and praying, which started February the 17th and it will end March the 31st. Of course, there is a guideline sheet that is up on our website at bhambc.org. If you click on message outlines at the top, you can actually download the lesson from there. But also, Pastor Mason did a teaching on it on February the 16th. And if you go back on our church's Facebook page, you can see that as well. Don't forget about all of our BBC virtual hangouts. Of course, that we met with the seniors on yesterday. That was great. But tonight, pastors meet with the youth and children at 6 o'clock p.m. He's also meeting with the men this Friday at 6 o'clock p.m. as well. Tomorrow, we are going to be ending our awesome relationships small group. That's at 7. If you care to register for that, please contact myself at my email address or at 205-451-7866. And then this Sunday, we're going to be ending our Reconstructing Our Relationship series. It's been great, really powerful. Go back and watch it as well when you have time, and also share it as well. And this Saturday we are having our Reconstructing Your Relationship conference. Y'all know this, the first couple, they did such a wonderful job last year, but they're going to be talking to our married couples. That's going to be Pastor Kerwin and Yolanda Lee out of Atlanta, Georgia, and then Pastor Thurston and Pastor Jennifer Connor are going to be talking to our singles, and that is this Saturday, the 27th at 11 o'clock a.m. Don't forget, we are on Facebook Live, YouTube, and on Periscope. And then every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we have our prayer call. And the number is 515-604-9324. And the access code is 381179. We are continually praying for our president, Joe Biden, and Vice President Kamala Harris and the entire administration. So please take 100 seconds per day to pray for them, to pray for the entire administration, and to pray for their families. As you see, we have a lot of online things going on at Birmingham Bible Church, because until things change, we're going to be virtual. But when that time permits itself, we will be back in person. But we want to make sure everybody is safe. We want to make sure everybody stays well. But please continue to support all of these endeavors so that you can stay connected to our BBC family. Thank you for your support, because your support helps us to give to the Compassion International Children that we have sponsored, and also to give out our food boxes, which we are doing this Saturday. So thank you so much for that. Well, those are all the announcements that I have. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And these are not just for BBC family. This is for anybody who wants to participate. So, Dr. Weems, do you have any closing remarks before we end?
Well, I just want to, say I appreciate the, the invitation, because, part of what I do, I'm sort of a missionary of sorts in terms of talking about, the importance of Black business, and indeed, thank you for the invitation. I appreciate it. I enjoyed myself today.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. And tell us once again your email address. I know you say you're on LinkedIn, but if you can say your email address one more time to our audience.
Sure. It is Robert, ROBERT .Weems, WEEMS, at Wichita, WICHITA.edu.
Amen. And before we close, so we have one of our viewers. They said that that Black insurance companies also made significant contributions to the Black church. You know anything about that?
Oh, yeah. When we look at a lot of the historic, African-American companies, again, it's in terms of, reinvestments, a lot of, church properties were able to, get assistance from Black companies. And there was, in a lot of places, a real symbiotic relationship between Black insurance companies and Black churches, where, Black insurance personnel would go in churches and talk to congregations about, their companies and the importance of insurance. And so there was a real close relationship between churches and pastors and Black insurance companies. Because when we look at that historic African-American community, it was very much a linkage between a variety of institutions.
Wow. And then one more question. Someone wants to know, what do you teach at Wichita State University? I know we talked about it a little bit in the beginning, but tell us one more time what you teach at the university.
Yeah, well, I teach primarily, African-American history courses. Even though my distinguished professor positions in business history, most of my courses are in African-American history, to fill that void. But I also teach courses in, African-American business history, U.S. economic history, and in fact, I'm developing a course on quote unquote ethnic entrepreneurship that looks at, African-American entrepreneurs, Hispanic entrepreneurs, and Asian entrepreneurs. In fact, this will be cross-listed with the, entrepreneurship department at Wichita State, because when we look at, studies of business, the activities of non-white entrepreneurs are rarely spotlighted and discussed. And again, this course is a way to help spotlight that. But my primary bread and butter in terms of teaching is African-American history.
Okay, well, we're going to have you back for the entrepreneurship, because we have been talking about that. We have every third Sunday, sometimes every month, we have what you call a virtual business expo, because we're really trying to get businesses out there and promoted. And so we're definitely going to have you back later on this year to help talk about some of that entrepreneurship.
Yeah, because in fact, Birmingham was the home of who Black Enterprise called the leading Black entrepreneur of the 20th century, A.G. Gaston. And in my African-American business history classes, I talk about A.G. Gaston, and in fact used the book that his niece, wrote on A.G. Gaston. So
That's right.
yeah.
Yeah, awesome. And did you say you wrote a book? I know you did some periodicals and journals.
Oh yeah, I've written 5 books.
Okay, that's what I thought. So
Yeah.
how can we, if someone wants to order any of your books, can they, I guess, get it on Amazon
Yeah,
or?
you could just go to Amazon.com. You could just, put my name in there, and my stuff will come up.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so of course, guys, that's Dr. Robert Weems, and Robert, last name spelled W-E-E-M-S. Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate this, and blessings for you and your family, and Wichita State University. Thank you so much. We appreciate this.
Oh, my pleasure.
Thank you. Everyone, make sure y'all share this video, share it with someone. All right, God bless. Have a great day.
You too now.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.